As two entrepreneurs, we spend around $4,500 a month in our personal lives, and we're answering one of our most asked questions.
How do you manage your expenses as a couple?
The short answer, we split things pretty evenly.
And what exactly does that look like? We split things into two categories, fixed-ish and variable.
For fixed expenses, we quite literally split it down the middle. For items like our mortgage and joint credit card, we take the total and we just divide it by 2.
For our variable expenses, we're pretty evenly split and we kind of take turns paying. So how that works is we each have our own personal spending allowance on a monthly basis. And then if one of us is having a better month in business, sometimes we get a little more flex with our spending and spend more than that personal allowance.
So this has been our guiding principle for the last 7 years together, but let's take a look at how we do it practically and how it morphed over time from having largely uneven incomes and paying different bills to where we are today.
Now let's look at what our accounts look like. So personally, we each have one personal credit card, one debit card, and one Koho for our personal spending.
We also have a joint credit card and a joint checking account for any bills that we pay together.
Now for the sake of this video, we're not talking about our additional savings accounts, our investing, or any of our business banking. As business owners, we pretty much pay ourselves the same way that an employee would receive a paycheck from their company. So that money comes into our checkings accounts and then we divide it from there. First, we like to pay what we call our fixed expenses. These are our have to pay costs. So we usually split these down the middle or we just pay off individual bills. These are generally the same cost every month or relatively predictable so we know what to expect. For most of our home-related expenses, that's where we use our single joint account. So that means our mortgage, our property tax, our gas bills, our house association fees, those are all coming directly out of the joint account. So every month we pay into it the same way someone might pay their rent, and that's gonna cover those house expenses. Other than that, when it comes to the house, we have our water and electricity bills, and these ones, we just each pay one of them. It's actually not really for a strategic reason. It's simply for the fact that these were set up in our individual names, and we just kind of kept paying them because it's generally even. So for anything individual bill, we set up a bill payee in our personal Scotiabank accounts and pay it directly that way. Lastly, we actually count our groceries as one of our fixed expenses. So even though it varies every month, we have that set amount that we know we're generally gonna spend. So we use that joint credit card we mentioned earlier as our grocery card, and we only ever use that otherwise for big purchases that we wanna splurge on. For example, the couch that I'm sitting on would be a purchase that we make on that card, so we can split the expense down the middle. We used to also use this joint credit card to take ourselves out on dinner dates, but then we realized we were kind of considering it like fake money because it felt like it wasn't coming out of our personal spending. So we would just put it on the joint credit card and then that started really adding up. Personally, we really like having a simple money system, so we totally backtracked on that and we started doing dinners on our own personal spending and just treating each other back and forth.
So when it comes to variable expenses, we usually call this the fun money or no regrets money. We give ourselves an allowance each month that we put onto a prepaid credit card. This allows us to spend freely on apparel, one-off items, coffee shops, pretty much anything that we don't need to pay. At first, we started with $200, which we thought was reasonable at the time, but we noticed that every month we spent the whole amount or we would go a little bit over. So after we decided to increase this amount to about $350 to $400, but at the same time, we also increased our income at this point, so it still made sense. Then there's what we call the others. This is when we want to splurge on something. What we would do is we would put it on our credit card and pay for it solo. This doesn't really happen because we normally can just fit it within our monthly allowance, or if it does happen, we would just pay for it together and put it on our joint card. Now, after we paid all our fixed expenses and our variable expenses and our monthly allowance, we do have some money left over, and what we do with that amount is that we put it into our high interest savings account in EQ Bank. And this can be put for an emergency fund, saving for a home, saving for a vacation, and any other savings goals that you may have. And besides savings, we would put the rest into our investment accounts in Wealthsimple.
Now, you may have noticed that we're missing some of the typical couple expenses like internet, cell phones, car. So because we are business owners, some of these expenses for us fall into business expense territory. So for example, with Josh's car, he actually bought his car with his business earlier this year because he is primarily using that as a working vehicle. I actually sold my car when we decided to move more centrally into the city. It had died a bunch and it just wasn't worth it. So now that I don't have a car, we don't really have those expenses on the personal side. Over the next 3 minutes, we're gonna show you what it looks like to manage money as a couple from student life to owning 2 homes together. In our first year of dating, I actually paid all of the fixed expenses and we shared the variable expenses. This was because I had already started working full time and Josh was still a student. I already had a bachelor apartment with a really sweet deal, and Josh just moved in because honestly, it was just a little bit easier. I lived close to school and we enjoyed spending the time together, so it wasn't really a big deal for him to move in, and I just kept paying my regular costs.
In year 2, we moved to a bigger 1-bedroom apartment. That year, I started paying rent, but because Mal was working full-time and I was still a student / working part-time, we paid an uneven amount.
In our 3rd year of dating, we moved again, this time into a townhouse that we bought with Josh's mom. Josh had finished school, he had fully graduated and was working a full-time job, myself as well, and we had started our side hustle, LVD Fitness. So we decided to split everything 50-50 going forward. Even though I had more in savings, Josh really wanted to be those equal parts now that he was working a full-time job.
By year 4, we had quit our jobs to run our side hustle full-time. But this meant we took a big pay cut. Mal went from about $62,000 to about $30,000 a year, and I went from $40,000 to $30,000 a year. We still decided to keep everything even. All we did was just work with a tighter budget.
The next year, we both started onto kind of what we'd call career 2. Josh was getting into real estate and I was getting into marketing courses and business coaching. So we decided to keep splitting everything evenly. At this point, our expenses were generally the same personally, but Josh was getting some extra business expenses as he was paying to get his real estate license.
In year 6, our careers were going really, really well. At that point, we saved enough to buy out my mom and take full ownership of the house. But because our costs stayed pretty much the same, nothing really changed with our budget.
And finally, that brings us to this year, year 7, where we bought our second home together. And even though our expenses did go up, we continued to do the 50-50 split more or less, with our variable spending really changing a bit more month to month. We like sharing what works for us because we love seeing those real life examples that work for other people, but we understand that our approach might not work for everyone. So here are some other options if you're not vibing with this.
What you could do is you could just pool all your money together and pay for everything together as a couple.
You can also split everything half and half, so keep your money separate, but split all the bills. Fun fact, people sometimes refer to this as going Dutch, but we actually found out in our research that that's a bit of an insult to the Dutch, and it's a really old reference from the war times.
Another option would be to go with the percentage-based approach. If you make more money, you would pay a higher percentage of the bill instead of going 50-50.
And lastly, there's the single income earner, and we kind of see this as 2 different approaches. The first being when one person brings home all the money and the other is playing a different role in the family, maybe taking care of kids, for example. The other one is when you use a single person's income to cover all your expenses and the other person's income is working towards those bigger things. So an example would be what we're kind of looking at for next year is Josh's real estate income helping to support all of our expenses and my business income working on those bigger goals like buying more property and investing more money. Say bye.
Goodbye.